The Life Coaching Toolbox Podcast is brought to you by Joeel and Natalie Rivera of Transformation Academy. In this episode, Natalie talks about how to move up the emotional scale. This episode is one of 11 episodes in a series about coaching your clients to develop emotional intelligence and master their emotions.
Let's take a look at the emotional scale. As humans, we all experience a wide range of emotions, from despair through joy. There are hundreds of different words that we use to describe these different experiences, but the emotional scale that we're going to be talking about contains approximately 30 emotions that exist at 12 different levels of intensity, just for the sake of simplicity. The most neutral emotional level is 5, contentment and boredom. This level has the lowest emotional intensity. As you move up or down the emotional scale, the emotions become more intensely felt. So I'm just going to run through the emotional scale that we're going to be working with. The first level is joy, appreciation, a feeling of empowerment and love. Next is passion, enthusiasm, and happiness. Next is positive expectation or belief. The next one is optimism or hopefulness. Number 5 that I mentioned is contentment or boredom. Now we're going to get into slightly more intense and less appealing emotions. So number 6 is pessimism, frustration, and uncertainty. Next is overwhelmment, disappointment, and doubt. After that, we have worry and anxiety, followed by anger and revenge, followed by hatred and rage. Next is sadness, grief, and guilt. And the last one is fear, despair, and powerlessness. Everything above level 5 is pleasant, while the emotions listed below level 5 are unpleasant. You could also look at it as positive and negative emotions. Notice that it's not about identifying which ones are good and which ones are bad, because all emotions are good. They serve a purpose by reflecting what's going on in our lives and in our minds. It's about deciding which emotions are wanted and which ones are unwanted. And even this can be tricky, because if I asked you if you want to feel pessimistic, you'd probably be saying no. But in some cases, you might feel differently. So, for example, if you're feeling boredom, you'd probably prefer to feel passionate. However, if you're feeling hatred, revenge is actually an improvement, which you might not have expected. But think about that. If you're hating somebody, doesn't the idea of getting revenge on them feel a little bit better? And so in that situation, revenge is an improvement, is something that you might actually want, and even though it's still a negative emotion, it is moving in the right direction. So anytime you're moving up the scale, you're always going to feel a sense of relief compared to where you were before. It feels good in comparison to the lower levels. When you move from despair to anger, it feels better because anger feels more empowering. And when you find your way from anger to frustration, you feel better again because it's less intense. And then when you can finally reach for hope, because you've gotten close enough to it, then you've crossed the threshold into the wanted or positive emotions. But ultimately, even once you're at hope, the goal is to keep on going. One important note is that you cannot jump very high up the scale all at once. The thought processes and physiological states that you experience when you're at each level of the emotional scale have strong momentum that keeps you feeling the way that you already feel. But by deliberately reaching for a better feeling thought, even if it's just slightly better, you can move your way up the scale incrementally. Like the example of despair to anger to frustration to hope. Just like you can move from hatred to revenge, and then further on to disappointment, and then eventually to hope and beyond. You can also move from something like boredom to optimism, and then eventually to enthusiasm. But you definitely cannot jump directly from anger to joy, or from hatred to love. The gap is just too wide. In this course, we're focusing on overcoming 3 of the most common unpleasant negative emotions, and all 3 of them are related. They are uncertainty, which can also be looked at as insecurity, anxiety, which can also be looked at as worry, and fear. Now, fear is obviously the most intense of the 3, and in a lot of cases is one of the absolute most intense emotions that we can experience. It can be completely overwhelming in our minds and our bodies. Fear is caused by the belief that you are under threat or will experience pain or danger. When you're in a state of fear, nothing else matters or exists but to protect yourself and to get to safety. You are operating in survival mode. The object of your fear can be real or imagined. It doesn't matter. Either way, you're going to experience the fear. We're going to get more into that in another video. Anxiety is less intense than fear. And if allowed to spiral out of control, it can lead you into a state of fear or panic. It's a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, and is almost always about an anticipated future event that is unpleasant or uncertain, whether the future event is imminent or far off in the imagined future. Uncertainty is, again, less intense than anxiety. However, continuing to think along these lines of uncertainty leads to a worsening of the state into a state of anxiety. Uncertainty is a feeling of apprehension, resistance, suspicion, or lack of confidence when you have beliefs that the outcomes are uncertain or unpredictable or risky. Often, people use the word insecurity to refer to similar feelings. This course is designed to help you learn to identify these emotional states and use awareness and self-control techniques to help diffuse and release the emotions in order to move up the emotional scale. The more intense an emotion is, the more challenging it is to change them. For this reason, the goal of the course is to catch your emotion at uncertainty and implement the techniques that you learn before your mind has the ability to spiral you down into anxiety and then further into fear. Of course, the tools you'll learn will help you with anxiety and fear as well and help you de-escalate yourself when you are in those states. But know, going into the course, that the earlier that you intercept the emotional state, the easier it will be to change. So here's a simple activity that will help you climb the emotional ladder. Keep in mind that you're not trying to solve the problem that's causing the emotion. You're just trying to find a better way of thinking about the problem that makes you feel better in the moment. You're searching for a better feeling thought about the subject that's bothering you. You're looking for that incremental relief. You're not looking to solve everything all at once. So, the first step is to select a subject that bothers you. I'm going to be giving an example for each one of these questions that you need to ask yourself, so you can kind of see the storyline of how someone else would work through this on a specific topic. So you select your subject. The example I'm going to use is somebody who thinks and feels, I'm fat. The subject of being overweight bothers them, and what they tend to say to themselves, or the thought that they have that makes them feel bad, is, I am fat. So next, describe what you think about the subject most of the time. What do you tend to think about it? What phrase sums up how you feel? In my example, the phrase is, I feel stuck, like I can't do anything about it. So next, identify the emotion that represents how this statement makes you feel. Look at the emotional scale if you need to. It might help you identify which emotion fits with this statement. And once you figure it out, take a moment just to feel that emotion. In my example, the emotion is powerlessness. The next step is to identify a thought about this subject that is true, but that feels slightly better than the original phrase that you chose. Either state it out loud or write it down. You can look at the scale and select an emotion that's slightly higher up the scale if you're having difficulty coming up with something, and then try to find a new phrase that matches that new emotion. There's a couple tips that I'm going to give you here, but first, I'm going to let you know what it looks like in the example that I'm talking about. So here are some slightly better feeling ways of looking at the situation about the person who feels like they're fat. Instead of saying, I feel stuck, like I can't do anything about it, now they could say, it's my parents' fault for feeding me the way that they did as a kid. Because instead of feeling powerlessness, now they feel anger, which is slightly more general and it's blaming somebody else. So it feels a little bit more empowering than just feeling hopeless. So here are my 2 tips. First, be general. When something's bothering you, the more specifically that you think about all the details of what's bothering you, the worse it's going to feel. For example, if you think, oh my gosh, my bank account just went negative, you'll probably feel a sinking pit in your stomach. It feels like worry and anxiety. But simply by being more general, you can feel slightly better. For example, I need to deposit money in my account. So that second phrase is just general. It's just a statement of something you need to do. It's not a judgment. It's not making a big deal about it. It's just a simple statement. And so it feels a little bit less intense than, oh my gosh, my bank account just went negative. So we're just looking for subtle differences here. The second tip is don't try to jump too high, which I mentioned before, because if you do, then the new statement that you give yourself won't be believable. If you hear yourself thinking, yeah, right, then it's a sign that the new phrase that you chose was too big of a jump. You're not going to try to be positive here. You're only looking for something that's less bad. For instance, an angry thought is better than a depressed one. With the bank account example, telling yourself, no worries, I'll be a millionaire one day, doesn't really work because you don't really believe it. And that's why just stating, I need to deposit money in my account is actually better than trying to convince yourself that you're going to be a millionaire, because putting money in your account is something you believe, where the millionaire example, you do not. Okay, so now on to the next step. Now that you have this new phrase that feels slightly better, think it and feel the new phrase. Do you feel a sense of relief? Can you tell the difference? Try out different phrases to see if you can get one that's better than the others, that gives you more relief. For each one, assess if it makes you feel better, worse, or neither. If it feels better, even a little bit, then you're going the right direction. And once you find that slight improvement, then the next step is to reach for a slightly better thought again. So I'm going to give you several different examples from my example about the person who's overweight of different thoughts that they could try on that would bring them further up the scale incrementally. So here are the examples. I'm tired of being fat. That has a feeling of frustration. It's a simple expression of emotion without judgment of the situation. And it certainly feels better than, it's my parents' fault for feeding me the way they did. And it's a lot better than, I feel stuck. So simply saying, I'm tired of being fat. It feels a lot better. You've worked your way up there now, incrementally. And now we're going to try another one to see if we can go higher. So here's the next one. Even if I'm fat, I have some other amazing qualities and I have a lot to offer, and I actually like myself. So this phrase has a feeling of contentment. It's looking for positive aspects, even though it still acknowledges that there's still something I don't feel great about, but you want to know what? There's other things that matter too. There's other positive aspects. And so we're going to go one step further. Now that you're at a state of contentment, you can reach further. I might not ever be my ideal weight, but I've had success in the past when changing my eating and exercise habits, and I felt great when I did it. I could do that again. So in this situation, the person's getting to a state of hopefulness. They're remembering the evidence of their own power. They could not have gotten to this statement and this state of hopefulness when they were stuck in that original phrase, I feel stuck, like I can't do anything about it. Because in that moment, they couldn't really even remember the evidence that they have made it through the situation before. So that's an example of how and why you work your way up the scale incrementally. So now if you haven't already, go ahead and do this activity with yourself. We do have a worksheet included that helps you walk through the process and includes a printout of the emotional scale.
Visit transformationacademy.com/toolbox to download free life coaching worksheets that go with the activities discussed in this podcast, plus other resources for creating a thriving life coaching business.